having lived in the state for more than 75 years, 45 of those in Fort Bend County. He and his wife, Mary, are both master gardeners and master naturalists. Don has advanced training through master gardeners in rainwater harvesting, irrigation efficiency, and turf care and management. In his first 9 years with master gardeners, he was heavily involved with our hotline operation, answering questions from the public. Today, Don spends most of his master gardening time, volunteer time, utilizing his training to helping to maintain and improve our demonstration garden and working our fundraising events. So Don, thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
I think that's my cue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And to all of you out there who have joined us, appreciate your attendance. Let's get started. First slide says a little bit. We do have a turf team as far as the Master Gardener organization. Obviously, we feel that everyone has turf of some type, whether it's minimal or massive acres. But today this is our landscape success series. This is the first in a multiple landscape success classes that will be given by the Master Gardener organization this year. And we're going to talk about your lawn. Now, the last week's probably been a little tough on it, and there's nothing I have to recommend to ward off the snow. Before I get too far into things, I have to give a plug for our demonstration gardens. Next major event coming up there will be our butterfly celebration on May the 3rd. And if you've never been out, we're out at the Fort Bend County Fairgrounds, just at the south end, behind the Bud O'Shields building, are our demonstration gardens. So I do hope you'll come out. We also have a turf trial there. I think Rochelle pretty well covered it, other than I've been a master gardener since 2008. Got started with rainwater. That seemed to lead to irrigation and then on to turf. So let's get started with what you came for. It's presented as turf grass because it's important to differentiate. We can't call it turf because that includes AstroTurf or the artificial turfs. Grasses, there's probably over 1,000 grasses that grow in Texas, but closer to 10, 15 turf grasses. The key distinction is turf grass will take some traffic. It will take sustained cutting on a regular basis. And that's what we're going to be looking at is turf grass today. Simple steps to lawn care. There's only 6 listed here. It ought to be really easy. Well, let's jump right in. Let's start with our soil. The thing about starting with the soil is most of us don't get to start with the soil. You either bought a home in an existing subdivision, or you moved into a new subdivision, or even in the case where I'm on an old cotton field, but there was very little I could do about the soil that was here. On the left-hand side, I've gotten a picture that from a development, and you really never know what's underneath your grass. It may be a mixture. It's whatever the builder could get a hold of when they were doing the backfill on your property. The right hand shows sandy, loamy, and clay. Most of the native soil here in Fort Bend County is going to be clay. It dries up, it stays real wet, it gets hard as rock, but that's what we have. If you're fortunate enough to have a loamy or sandy soil, you're probably going to have better luck growing any number of things. Though even with clay, we do manage to have some very good turf here in our county. Recognizing the fact that when you've bought a home, or most homes, even in the newer subdivisions, come with at least the front yard sodded in, I'll get back to it a little later in the presentation, but there's not much you can do about the soil. You can try to amend it through fertilization. The other that you can do is aeration. We'll talk about that. But something that's really important is getting a soil sample. Without that, you really don't know what your grass is trying to grow in. The forms are available at our office. You can get them online as well. Uh, what you do want to look for is, I guess it was last year, maybe the year before, used to be a generalized form, and it was whether you were a farmer or a homeowner, you filled out the same form. We now have one that's called an urban and homeowner soil sample. And it is really important that you do indicate that this is not for your flower beds that you're sending in a soil sample, but it is soil from where your turf or your lawn grass is growing. That's about it on soil. So now it's choose the right turf grass for your yard. And here again, you may or may not have that choice. Many of the larger subdivisions here in the county specify the grass, whether that's a Bermuda grass or a St. Augustine grass, and they may even go down to a specific type of grass. This slide shows us as having warm season, cool season. We don't have cool season grasses here. Annual ryegrass, there's some of the farmers, or really it's not the farmers, it's the cattlemen, will plant ryegrass during the winter just so the cows have something, but it dies off. The left-hand side, Bahia grass, I used to have 17 acres of that, and it makes a great hay, but I certainly wouldn't have it as a lawn. It'll eat your lawnmower blade just overnight, it seems like. Bermuda grass, a lot of people think of as a weed, but it can be a very beautiful lawn. Almost all of your athletic fields are some form of Bermuda grass. Buffalo grass grows in Texas. It does not do well here. Centipede has just never seemed to catch on. I used to tell people that Seashore paspalum, if you live down along the coast, was probably something to look at. If you've ever been to Minute Maid Park, or now it has a new name, I believe, but the field that the Stros play on is a Seashore paspalum. St. Augustine is what so many of us grew up with, and you find all over Texas and the south of the states. Zoysia is something that we're seeing more and more of. It's a Japanese import, but again, it's beginning to become more available. It does well. I'm going to get into really spend the time on Bermuda grass, St. Augustine grass, and the zoysias, talking about strengths and weaknesses of those. And from that, I'll let you read that rather than me going into it too heavily. When it rains like it does here, you'd think that water efficiency wouldn't be terribly high on the list, but when you're paying for water, it becomes very important. When we talk about nitrogen, that's really fertilization. Temperature range, well, we know it gets really hot here. It does dry out here. Rhizomatous or stoloniferous. I had a heck of a time remembering those. Tip, and it's strictly that. Rhizome and root, i.e. it goes underground and pops up, and stoloniferous and surface. So you've got S and S and R and R. So just a tip from me. The other things that you look at are the last really line down there, the stresses associated with the pests and the traffic, and how these grasses fare through some of the things that they're exposed to. I'll talk about two different kinds of calendars. We've got a warm season grass growth. We've got a cool season grass growth. I'll also talk later about uh, maintenance or grass maintenance calendars. But let's take a quick look at this one. We're looking at basically our growing season. Yeah, I mean, in the summertime, our grasses, I know mine seems like it grows an inch overnight sometimes. Uh, it's hot, it's damp. Grass loves it, does really well. Cool season, and this is part of why they don't do well here, uh, has to do with when our temperature is best for growing and water availability. So that's the main reason we're looking at the warm season grasses. Okay, a little more specific here. First thing I want to point out, as you look at that slide, you'll see a lot of things that start with TIF. Tifton 9, TIF Sport, Tifway 419. If you have a grass or you're looking at a grass and it's got TIF in it, it came from the University of Georgia. Tifton, Georgia specifically is where the University of Georgia's turf program is. And there are a great many of them there. In fact, the trial that we have going on at our demonstration gardens, we have 2 Georgia grasses. We've got 2 that were developed at Texas A&M. But these are just the common ones, particularly Tifway 419. There's 2 of the major subdivisions out here in Fort Bend that actually specify Tifway 419 as the grass that is required. So strengths, weaknesses. Let's just go down to Bermuda grass to start with. Look at shade, Bermuda and shade. I mean, how many ball fields, sports fields have shade? A lot of yards when subdivision first went in, everybody had to plant trees, and that was fine. Those trees continue to grow and create more and more shade. That's where Bermuda grass probably has its greatest weakness, but it does exceedingly well in the heat, the drought, traffic. As I said, it's used for almost all of the sports fields, and it's less prone to disease. When you skip down to St. Augustine, shade is one of the strengths. It has a broader blade to it. It grows longer or is kept at a longer height, and it does much better in the shade. But if you've got kids that are out there playing on it, or particularly this past week with the cold, St. Augustine does not do well. And the last is the zoysia grass. Again, it's better with shade than your your Bermuda grass would have been. One of the things that comes up here is thatch, and you don't generally think about that, but just the grass clippings settling over the top, it requires a little more raking, a little more care for it to do well. And the other thing is its recovery time. It's very slow to grow in initially and very slow to recover. I mentioned drought as one of the things we look at, and Bermuda grass does exceedingly well. It's amazing how well it recovers after drought. Zoysia grass does well. Get down to your
Good. I just wanted to cash that check today.
excuse
I'm
me.
sorry. Did you weigh on it? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Did you weigh on it? Oh no, any way is fine.
Hello.
Can we put, if you please mute, please mute your audio.
I didn't think I was getting a check today. Okay.
Took care of it.
Okay, thank y'all. Drought. It's hard to think about drought after seeing all the water and the snow melt and so forth, but come July, you'll understand fully as you're either running your irrigation longer or your grass is turning brown. Bermuda is probably the best. Your St. Augustine requires a little more water. This next one gives you an idea. This is a field that has not been watered in quite some time. And you see the largest green spot is the Bermuda grass. Here is an unirrigated, exact same plot taken hopefully from the same vantage point. And the difference between August and then we started getting rain later in the year and how quickly the Bermuda came back and has greened up. Can't guarantee if your lawn is going to come back quite that quickly, but it has a better chance if it's Bermuda. Sunlight. Sometimes being high is good. In this case, it's maybe not so good. That's why Bermuda grass does not do exceedingly well in the shade. It needs a lot of sun. St. Augustine has the lowest sun requirements. Again, we get down to the broader blade and longer height. I'll let you again read through that. I've mentioned blade thickness. If you're familiar with Bermuda, it's a very fine blade, where St. Augustine is probably 1/4 of an inch or even 3/8 of an inch wide. Obviously, it's going to capture more sunlight onto the surface of the blade, and that's why it becomes very important for the photosynthesis. More on shade, and again, it comes into play in your older neighborhoods, you're more mature, or if you've bought a place out in the country and it's got beautiful trees, you want to build your home there, just be aware that the shade is going to be something you may fight if you're trying to grow something like Bermuda grass. The other thing has to do, we touch on weeds. We're going to have a whole section on weeds later on, but they seem to grow in sunlight. Shade doesn't matter, but they do particularly well in the shade as far as competing against your grasses. Salinity is something that we've not normally looked at. We're far enough from the coast that we don't generally have it, but as there is more and more irrigated turf rather than using well water or rainwater, salinity becomes something to be considered. The paspalum I mentioned earlier does very, very well with that. Bermuda does reasonably well. In fact, all of the three that we're going to focus on are at the top of the list there as far as doing well with salinity.
My phone is there.
This just gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. The yellow shaded area is where we consider it to have higher groundwater salinity. And we're obviously all of our area is in that. As water tables go down, as you have more salt available, it's going to begin to infiltrate. You're going to see it more in what's acceptable for water levels. So today it's really not a strong issue, but all of the three, as I said, we're focusing on will tolerate salinity. Okay, let's take a harder look at what I consider the big three here. I mentioned stolons and rhizomes. That's a real plus because Bermuda will send out roots. Periodically, they get close to the surface and up pops another shoot. The stolons are on the surface to begin with, so Bermuda tends to fill in and grow more rapidly than some of your other grasses. Being drought and heat tolerant. With our clay soils, deep rooting becomes important, and getting the water down to them is important. Won't talk about shade anymore. Mowing requirement, the frequent. If you have Bermuda grass, it's normally kept shorter than St. Augustine. And in order to have something that's mowed low or kept low, you have to mow more frequently. As it says here, you're looking at 1 to 2 inches. The one I feel like is probably too short. 2 is more common. But as we look at St. Augustine, you'll see we're looking at a 3.5 inch mowing height. And when you're mowing, you can only take off so much of the blade at a time. So having something that's a little longer lets you get away with not mowing as frequently. This one again is primarily stolons, but it is a deep rooting. The cold tolerance, disease, traffic, and chinch bugs. We don't have a lot of cold. That's hard to say after this last week, but normally we don't have a lot of cold. You will find more diseases, particularly your fungal and problems with the St. Augustine grasses. Again, if you've got pets, people, kids particularly playing on your lawn, it's not going to do as well as a Bermuda grass field would. The mowing height I've touched on. When we get to mowing, I'll talk a little more about rotary mower, but it's a standard type lawn mower, and weekly is usually sufficient. The zoysia grass, we're back to another rhizomes and stolons. Let you run down through that. It's another 1 to 2 inches, and once again, the information presented here is straight from A&M, from my experience, which obviously is not as great as theirs, but I've found 1 inch, trying to maintain anything at 1 inch is very, very difficult. So I'd go more for the 2 inches. And again, you're looking at a weekly mowing with this. Didn't spend any time, I guess, on the others. Bermuda has got your highest fertilization requirement. Zoysia grass is going to be the second, and your St. Augustine generally requires less fertilization. So there's trade-offs between them in terms of how fast it grows, how much water it needs, how much fertilizer it needs. No one of them excels in all of those areas. Let's talk about mowing. What's the right height? I talked about whether it's 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inches, 3.5 inches even. Here's what most people consider a standard mower. This one's equipped with a rear bagger, which we don't recommend. The black chute here is covering up what would normally be a discharge. These levers let it be adjusted up and down fairly easily. But again, this one, based on all of these levers, looks like it's probably a self-propelled, which makes it a little easier to use. So that's what your typical homeowner is going to be using to mow their lawn. The mowing height, again, I don't encourage anyone to try Bahia grass, but the others, St. Augustine's the highest, zoysia and Bermuda grass are going to be the lowest. There is a trade-off. You're going to mow more frequently. I mean, if you consider a putting green on a golf course, it's maybe mowed twice a day, but it looks beautiful. So there are trade-offs in terms of just what the look is. What are you trying to achieve? Why do we mow? Well, it's for appearance, or because the HOA says we have to, one of the two. It's a destructive practice. I mean, hopefully you're cutting it off. Sometimes the blade is just whacking it off. And if you take off too much at a time, general rule, we talk about a third of the blade at any one cutting. And the part here on mowed too low, there used to be something that talk about as scalping your lawn. We don't, as a rule. I've not seen anything in the last, at least 10 years that recommends scalping. So you do want to avoid mowing it too low, because you cut off so much of the blade that the recovery is going to be very slow. And the last there is too high. And being realistic about it, think back at Beryl. I don't think anybody could avoid having to mow too high. It was just growing too fast. We had too much water. Sometimes these things happen, but just wanted to at least put this out so you're aware of the consequence of letting it get tall or cutting it too short. Let me start with the lower right-hand picture. One blade was cut and one was whacked off or beaten off. This is the importance of having a reasonably sharp mower blade on your mower. There's less damage, less destructive to the blade. It recovers much more quickly. The picture on the left, there's a line through there at taking off 1/3 of the blade. So it gives you an idea. Now that's a St. Augustine looking grass that they've pictured there. And the blades are St. Augustine as well. But so the higher mowing heights help increase the overall plant health. The idea of reducing weed pressure, it helps shade things out. Just simply having that longer blade, if something's cut down at the 1 to 2 inches versus 3 to 3.5, you're going to generate a little more shade on the ground. So that's a benefit to St. Augustine. Something to think about there. I mentioned scalping, and I really don't recommend that. Pattern is important, and a lot of people, particularly I don't know how many of you out there do your own lawn. If you're attending this, probably you do. But if you have a lawn service, they are notorious for they pull the stuff off the truck or trailer and they mow the grass the same way week after week after week. And what we recommend is mow it east-west today, north-south next week, maybe go horizontal, vertical. But don't mow it the same way, because believe it or not, even with that light mower that I showed, it will begin to create slight divots and your grass won't grow as well. It also doesn't look as good. I mentioned that the mower I pictured happened to have a grass catcher on it. Most mowers today come with some form of mulching blade. If your mower does not have one, you can create a mulching mower by changing the blade. Blades are relatively inexpensive, and what a mulching blade does is it cuts the blade off, and then before it can hit the ground, it's still up under the mower. It's being cut multiple times by additional fins on that blade to make smaller pieces. And what you're doing there is you're putting the grass back on the ground, but not creating a thatch situation. If you just cut the blade and that's the only cutting that goes on, you have a larger piece of grass that takes more time to break down. The smaller the piece of grass that lays on the ground, the faster it decomposes. And mulching can actually reduce your fertilization requirements as much as 10%. So and who wants to have to bag it and then put it out on the curb or dispose of it in some other fashion? So I think we've really already covered this one, just a bigger blow up, more description on the parts, what we consider the crown and the tiller. I guess haven't touched on the very base of the plant versus the tip of the blades, and then how it grows. again, the 1/3 rule comes into play. One third of it is all you want to cut off at any one time. If you got one of these, don't cut it, please. I stick this in just to make sure everybody's still awake. Okay, we've got our soil, we've got our grass, we're mowing it. If we don't water it during the summer, it's definitely not going to grow. So let you take a look at those before I get started. Most homeowners overwater. It's amazing, particularly new homes. Your irrigation companies install the irrigation system and they set it to run sometimes every day because they want to make sure the lawn that's put in does not die. And unfortunately, overwatering can be as bad or worse than underwatering. So check your irrigation, make sure it's set properly. Know that there's any other really key points there. The last one on the irrigation plan, it's important that you at least have a familiarization with your irrigation, know how to turn it on, how to turn it off, when it goes on, when it shuts off, how long it runs for each zone. Fairly simple things, but they really do make a difference. You want to be sure you're watering your plants and not your sidewalks, or that it's running down the driveway and out to the curb. So check it every once in a while. The first slide or first section we got into, I talked about the types of soil. Clay will hold soil or hold water better than your other soils, but it takes it less time for it to be taken in. So because of that, clay generally has to be watered longer in smaller intervals or shorter intervals. Also, if you're on a lot that it happens to be steep as far as from the house going toward the street, becomes more and more important to water longer or more frequently. If you would normally water 30 minutes, if you could break that up into 3 10s, you'd get more benefit out of it with a clay soil, particularly if it has any slope to it. That gives it a chance to infiltrate and be taken into the soil rather than running off. The grass varieties, as I went through describing those, talked about Bermuda grass with the drought tolerance. So St. Augustine's going to require more frequent watering in all likelihood. The environmental conditions, guess I should at least mention, we have high humidity, we have high temperatures. Something that a lot of people don't consider is the wind that we have and the effect that it has on your lawn and how quickly it dries out. In some of our irrigation classes, we talk about how to use your irrigation controllers, also the new what are called smart controllers, how those work. Some of those actually take into consideration temperature, humidity, all of the events there listed under the environmental conditions, and make adjustments. So it's another thing that can be done to improve your lawn and also save you some money in terms of watering. When to water. I don't know how many times I'll go somewhere and it's the middle of the day and the sprinklers are going off. The wind's at its highest, the temperature's at its highest. Both of those are bad. You're wasting water. signs of drought, just walk on the grass. Take a look at, after walking, what does it look like? Are there footprints still in it? They'll give you an idea of if it's not getting enough water. Talked about watering shorter intervals more repeatedly, but that's in any one day. You don't have to water every day. Actually, watering every day, it is not going to improve the root growth, because what you're trying to do is get the water deeper in to encourage the roots to go deeper. By watering more frequently, your grass kind of trains itself. Well, I only need to go an inch deep and I've got plenty of water. Unfortunately, that 1-inch root is not going to survive when the drought comes in. Whether you're watering or not, it's going to dry out. The time of day, it used to be that with irrigation systems, the recommendation was, don't run it at night. And we still agree for turf, not to run actually anything that has an aerial type spray. If you're using drip or subsurface drip, you could run it at midnight. With conventional spray, if you do it early in the morning, just as the sun's coming up, it has all day to dry out. And I'll get to that when we get into some of the problems. When your lawn stays wet, particularly if you were to water at night and it stays wet all night, you're going to create a problem for yourself and some of the funguses and diseases we find in the grass varieties. All right. I mentioned aeration and fertilization as ways to improve your soil. Fertilization, get a soil test, find out what's needed in that soil. And the one other thing you can really do to help with your soil is aerate. For most homeowners, I don't recommend it as a homeowner type activity. Have it done. The reason I tell people to shy away from it, you need to mark all of your sprinkler heads, anything that's close to the surface. It's not an easy tool to run. It's a piece of equipment that punches holes in the ground. And and it's not something you do every week. Once a year may be overkill for most people. If you've been in a community or it's been in existence for several years, it's worth looking at and it may help. It does give you an opportunity to pull out some soil, get some compost down into the holes that are created, and improve the overall health of your soil. Here's the, if you think of it, no water, no air, you don't have any growth going. Your soil particles have just been pushed together so hard that there's no room for anything else. And that's why your plants don't grow.
He's going to be calling for early elections because of the need for strong mandates to fight President Trump's plans to impose tariffs on Canadian.
I'll find that, Dawn.
Okay, moving on. I talked about the benefits, and I'll let you just go ahead and take a look at those. The last couple, I think, are really important. Well, I guess it's the last three. You're creating a hole every time one of these tines goes in, and it pulls out a plug that is now an opportunity to fill it with something. And one of the things with doing core aeration is it's done, and then you come back over and would use something like compost on top of it to try to get it down across the entire surface, but particularly down in the holes that have been created. This begins to help break down some of your clay soil and give you better water and fertilization take up. give you an idea that it's only the side view, but the two tines, the left-hand side is a holotine, and that's exactly what it is. It pulls a plug out every time it goes in the ground. It comes up with a little plug of soil and throws it off to the side. A solid tine literally just punches a hole in the soil. So we recommend, if you've not ever done it before, to definitely try to use a hollow tine or have a hollow tine utilized. Okay, let's talk about fertilization. I've mentioned it several times. Particularly if you had your soil test done, they're going to tell you what you probably need. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be nitrogen. Thing to remember about your fertilizer, a 3-1-2 is the overall ratio. This one's not quite a 3-1-2. If this is a 50-pound bag and it's 28, 5, 12, that means 28% of 50 pounds is nitrogen. So you have 14 pounds of nitrogen in this bag. Again, it's 5% and 12%. So most people, and generally what we find is the nitrogen. It's N, K, and P, phosphorus and potassium. And here in Fort Bend County, it's very rare that you need anything other than nitrogen. But again, a soil test will confirm that for you. And one of the things on the results you'll get back on your soil test, it actually tells you how many pounds, and generally that's pounds per 1,000 square feet. So it's important to know that that's not 28 pounds, but 28% of whatever the poundage is. And then also knowing something about your yard. Was it, do you have a 5,000 square foot lawn, etc.? So you don't spend too much money buying fertilizer that you're not going to use. First one, why fertilize? Well, because you want your lawn to look a little better. Do I need to apply? Well, we don't know until we do a soil test. How much fertilizer? Again, the soil test is going to help on that. If your lawn is not green, definitely nitrogen will help it green up. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's going to help. And selecting a good fertilizer, for some people, a good fertilizer is a cheap fertilizer. Others, it's truly what's a good fertilizer. You have slow release and fast release products. A fast release product is going to break down very, very quickly. You'll see immediate green up in your lawn. And 2 weeks from now or a month from now, you may not be able to tell that you put fertilizer out. So that's where you get into your slow release. And if you'll think of most of your granular fertilizers, if the individual grains had been coated, and that's literally what most of your slow release fertilizers have been treated, to where there's a shell around the actual fertilizer, and it has to break down or it slowly comes off of the product, releasing the fertilizer. And that's why it tends to last a little longer. Really important thing about fertilizer. When you put it out, everyone I've ever seen talks about watering it, because they're not going to work. If you put it out and just let it lay there, particularly during the summer, it'll do nothing but burn your lawn. So be sure you water in the fertilizer. I think we've probably covered that. The fall fertilizers, This particular session is being given a little earlier this year. We had hoped to get ahead of things. It's a little late for some of the fall fertilizer, if you will. We're more into spring, and really spring for us is once your grass starts growing. It's probably going to be mid-March to late March before it starts to take off and actively grow. And that's what I'd consider spring. Your summer, unless it's new or you're really having a problem, I'd stay away from it, because unfortunately people tend to get it out there and they either don't water it enough or they over fertilize. You wind up with a burn situation. So be careful with when and what you fertilize with. Your slow release fertilizers are generally more expensive, but you'll get less burn out of it. The other thing about fertilizers is uniformity. Go two directions with it. You'll get much better coverage. This one was very uniform, but obviously they went north-south, and that was it. And you can, looks like they were using a drop type fertilizer spreader rather than a rotary, something that throws it out. And right where they drove the little cart, it's pretty and green. But had they gone back the other way with it, use half as much fertilizer going this way and then come back the opposite direction or perpendicular to it, and you'll get a much better coverage. I feel like I've beaten shade to death. Recycle, the runoff. Again, it depends. Here in Houston, we tend to be pretty flat, so runoff is not a huge problem. But fertilizing right before it rains, I think like Sunday or Monday of this week, it's supposed to rain 80%. We may get a pretty heavy rain. Shade, because the grass is not going to get as much sun, it's not going to take up the nutrients as quickly. And that's why the using less fertilizer comes into play in your shade areas. Age of the lawn, how long has it been there? What's been done to it? Newly established, it's got more active root growth. They're probably not as deep, so fertilization does come into play more in a newly planted than it would in an established lawn. The picture is actually showing a cross section of what your yard, what this device is. It's got basically a handle that you can grip on either side, push it down in, and it cores out a section. You see just the grass on top. Right below it is the root zone, and probably what has developed over time from fertilization and the clippings and that sort of stuff. It's much darker, and then you get down. This one is not a clay because that's a more of a sandy type soil. But I mentioned the darker part, and that's, as I say, the nitrogen, the fertilization, the clippings. And what you're trying to do is get it to the point where the roots are getting down into that lower section. If you could get your roots to not be 1 to 2 inches, but closer to 4 to 6 inches, your grass will do better. It'll take up more with the water that you're applying to your lawn, and you generally have to use less fertilization. Okay, we only have to look at the top 3 really. As I had said, Bermuda grass takes more nitrogen. It's short, it responds very well to nitrogen, but it uses it very quickly, and that's one of the reasons it requires it more. I'm going to skip forward. I'll go back. here's a nitrogen plot, or excuse me, a Bermuda plot up at A&M. And it's a little hard to tell from the picture, but you have no nitrogen and then differing rates. And the one at the top right-hand side of the picture is getting into the highest rate of nitrogen, and it has better coverage and a little more green to it. It's going to come down to what's acceptable for you. What do you want? What do you want your lawn to look like? What does your homeowners association expect your lawn to look like? Okay. Zoysia is not too far behind, and then the St. Augustine, but you're at 2/3 the amount of fertilizer with either of those grasses. So there is some savings. The others, particularly the centipede and the buffalo, but as I say, I see no buffalo. I've never seen buffalo growing in the Houston area successfully. And seashore paspalum, I mentioned we have that in a test plot. Most of the paspalums are designed to be cut at a very low level, and I'm not sure I'd recommend it as a lawn for most homeowners because of the equipment that's required to keep it, and I guess just the effort to maintain the lawn. So with the Bermuda, Zoysia, and St. Augustine gives you an idea of what your yearly requirements. And this is pounds per year. And so if you're looking at doing 5 pounds per 1,000 each time you fertilize, that gives you an idea of what your lawn's going to need. That's why it's important to have, number one, the soil test done, and also to have some information about how large your lawn is. You've got your lot size, that's on your deed or your plot plan, but how much has been taken out for your ornamentals, your house, your driveway, your walkways, etc., and come up with some ballpark number that you might use. It'll give you a much better handle on how much of the fertilizer you might need. Okay, we already talked about that one. And this is labeled cultural practices, and really how green it is, how long it is, what variety it is. Much of that is cultural. This is what most people have more problems with. You can either put enough fertilizer to it or enough water to it and take care of it. But when you get into this, this is where what is my problem and how do I treat it really come into play. You're all familiar with IPM, I assume. You're not. Integrated pest management. I'm not sure I'd consider it strongly a cultural, but it's very physical. What are you doing to care for your plants? And are you creating a habitat? There are beneficial insects. Most lawn, you don't think about that so much. Do you have weeds? What are its nutrient requirements? That's what anybody can get out and mow it. Your lawn service comes and a lot of them will say, well, you need to do this as well. But as the general homeowner, yeah, you mow every Saturday or every Wednesday or whatever. But are you looking at your lawn and considering, I got a little spot over there. I'm seeing weeds here. That's where IPM comes in. Do you have healthy turf? Your selection's been made. Mowing habits do come into play. If you have Bermuda and you're trying to mow it every other week, it's probably not going to do well. In our environment, that's not sufficient mowing interval. It's too short, or excuse me, too long. How much irrigation, how much fertilization? What other things or other cultural practices might there be that you're not considering? Let me take just a moment and say something about keeping a record. Uh, if you're new to your home, everything about your lawn is new. If you've been there a while, you may say, well, you know, I had a problem last year over in that spot, and sure enough, this year I do too. I strongly encourage people to keep a notebook. At least make it, it doesn't have to be overly detailed, but I put this kind of fertilizer on, and this is the date I did it, and this was how much. Or I had a problem in some area. So you know year to year what was done, what worked, and also some of the things we're going to talk about are going to be preventative to try to not have that issue or problem come up again. I think just looking at the slide though, going back to it, I'm amazed where weeds come up, and they come up much faster than grass does. You can walk down sidewalks, even in commercial areas, and there's a weed that's come up, and you think, how in the world can that survive here? They're tough little devils. They just are. Uh, Compacted. That's where we talked about the aeration. That's about all you can do for the compacted. But bare and disturbed. Well, if you've done some work and then didn't resod it, didn't water it in, didn't make an effort to get the grass growing, believe me, the weeds will start growing. They like it where there's not competition. The last item there, I think I probably have in the presentation a couple of times. A great lawn is a terrific deterrent to weeds. If you have a good, healthy lawn, it makes it much tougher for weeds to develop. Speaking of weeds, I mentioned with our grasses, we had cool and warm season grasses, and that we only had warm. But with our weeds, we're fortunate. We have both warm and cool season weeds. It doesn't matter. There's something that's going to come up. Your grassy weeds, goosegrass, crabgrass. Then you have your cooler season, your chickweed, henbit, poana. We didn't have poana here 10, 12 years ago. It has slowly worked its way from the north to the south, and it seems to really like it here. I get more and more people commenting that they see it showing up in their lawn. Most of these will talk about something called a pre-emergent, and putting those out at the right time will help keep these from coming up. We have both cool and warm season, and they come in three types. Broadleaf, which is just what it says. It's going to be a leafier looking weed. Your grass-like, they look like your grass, your crabgrass, goosegrass. They look like an irregular grass and have grass blade looks to it. And then your sedges. And sedges, by and large, all of your sedges have edges to them. If you feel them, they'll be triangular or even square sometimes. But those are the three types we have. And just to give you some idea of some of those that you may have run into, you hear about all the time, dollarweed, clover, chickweed, that's considered your broadleaf. And if you think about them and how the leaf tissue is, that's where they get their name. The grass type, and in the case of these are all labeled, though there are some others that are considered a grass type that aren't called grass, but goosegrass, crabgrass, both smooth and large. And then sedges, a yellow, there's a purple, got annual, right here. See how green and pretty that is? When it first comes up, it looks really good until you say, wait a minute, I mowed over that and it wouldn't mow. Sedge is it's really tough to mow over. It doesn't cut. You kind of beat it and you wind up with this shredded looking tops there. And that's one of the first indications I know I've got a sedge that's come up if I didn't see it initially, is my mower went over it and I look back and and sure enough, I go look and it's a sedge that's popped up. I mentioned pre and post, and I think the definitions or the little comments are pretty straightforward. Pre-emergent, you put it out, and for us, these products would have gone out late October, early November. They're not useless now, but they're not going to do you as much good. You might get away with a little of it toward the end of February for some of your cool season weeds, if you know that they're a problem for you. That's where having this notebook or keeping some kind of records, if you don't have these in your lawn, unless your neighbor has done something drastic, ripped out everything they had and replanted, they're probably not going to be a nuisance this year. It's not like they just occur immediately unless there's been some disturbance of your soil, your grass. But a pre-emergent, literally, the weed never germinates. It's put out well ahead of time, and the weed seed itself may be produced by the flower of the weed, but it will not germinate. And then the post-emergent, it's up, it's growing, it's saying, hey, look at me, I'm a weed. Well, a post-emergent's the way you get rid of those. And these are things that you have got to consider. What kind of grass do I have? And the reason that's important is some products, if you have Bermuda grass, it thinks St. Augustine's a weed, and vice versa. Where am I in the growing season? Well, right now I've just come out of being frozen, and I'm really not growing actively. What type of weeds? Is it a broadleaf weed that you have? And then what have I already done or applied? That's generally later in the growing season if it's been a continual through the growing season, or from your record that you've begun keeping. Yeah, I had a problem last year with nut sedge over in that part of my yard. And so because if you don't have the problem, there's no reason to treat for it. But if you see it or have had it, you want to go ahead and treat for it. I'll let you take a look at those. The things I particularly want to point out is like the weed killer, the top line, second from the left, says Southern. Look for a product preferably that's for your kind of grass. If it says Southern Lawns, is it St. Augustine, zoysia, or Bermuda grass? Particularly if it says for St. Augustine, you don't want to use it on either of the other two. And then they're very, very specific. You've got nuts sedge. You've got one that's a weed. Image is very good for most of your sedges. The far upper line, far right, the image package there says it's atrazine. And atrazine is the primary ingredient in all of your weed and feed products. And unfortunately, atrazine thinks anything other than grass is a weed, and that includes small trees and shrubs. You want to be very careful if you're using this as whether it's a spray or a drop type or granular, that you don't get any of these types of products into your flower beds. So Be sure you read, well, and go on here, read the label. Granular for most people is easier, more efficient. You get it in bags, you don't have to mix it, you put it in a spreader. A drop spreader is literally just that. It falls out the bottom. It goes below the spreader. You've got to, if you didn't cover the yard with your spreader, you didn't get it fertilized. A rotary will throw it out, but you have to be sure you're far enough away from your flower beds that you're not doing that. You want to try to avoid going heavily around your trees if it's an atrazine product, because it won't necessarily kill your tree, but it's not going to help your trees particularly. Also, as part of the instructions that come with most of those, if it's a granular particularly, they'll say to sweep it off the concrete, get it back into the grass. There's no reason to wash these products down into the drain system. The last item there is if it's a post-emergent, it probably contains 2,4-D. 2,4-D has been around, I think, since the late 30s. I know the mid 40s, and it'll kill almost any plant. So just being aware that you don't want to overuse it. Be sure you read the label and follow the instructions. This time of year, when I used to do hotline, we'd get calls, particularly, well, really October, November. People had fertilized and then it got cool and then it would rain a little and you start growing fungus. We had more problems in the fall than most times of the year, and they were caused by the homeowner 90% of the time. Adequate drainage, if you have a little slope, that's fine. What you want to be careful of is not having low spots in your lawn. If you have some area where water will pond or pool, you're encouraging it, weeds and funguses. Big thing about proper fertility for me is making sure you put it out properly, but also using the right amount or type of fertilizer. And then mowing can have a big effect. As far as the irrigation, again, I talked about mowing early in the, or excuse me, irrigating early in the morning, not in the evening. That way your lawn has a chance to dry out, because like so many other things, mold, mildew, lawns get fungus, and it's caused by getting wet, staying cool, and staying wet longer than it should. And think of that as your yard, and it's no different. Here are the worst of them, the most common ones. Fairy ring, don't see as much of. Gray leaf spot, particularly St. Augustine. The taller blade will tend to stay wet longer. That's a reason to make sure that you don't water late in the day. Large patch, and it is large patch, not brown patch. It's the same fungus, but in different species of grasses. We have large patch. And then take all, to me, is I see more of, and it's harder to get rid of. We've had people actually have to go in and remove entire sections of the lawn to get rid of it, treat the soil, the underlying soil, and resod. And fungicides are usually the recommended and required way to get rid of any of these particular problems. Here's some quick pictures. This is the fairy ring, and generally you'll find this. Sometimes you'll get toadstools or mushrooms that come up. A lot of times, if it's a lot that was cleared to build a home, this might have been a tree, and this is residue, and it has to do with higher fertility, almost too much. that you get this greening effect. Here's large patch, and it it's not going to be solid across your lawn, but it's very noticeable. This is the leaf spot, and again, this is St. Augustine primarily, and it is small spots that appear on the leaves, generally brought on by water sitting there, and you get the fungus. And then this is, I feel, the worst. Low spots in the lawn will cause it, poor drainage. If you have a downspout and it comes out and it stays too long, this tends to take effect. And as I say, it's one of the harder ones to get rid of. But we do have some help. We got some products that'll help us out.
Don,
Yes,
just giving you a heads up, the time is 2:12.
thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. We've tried to do everything right in terms of mowing it, fertilizing it. We've looked into the drainage, but you still have some of these problems. And these are two items that are recommended, particularly for large patch. And I'm terrible at the pronunciations. I'll tell you up front. Propizozole, and the other is microbiturol. I hope I got those close. They're both labeled for fungus control, and both of these in the pictures, one's got a bag. It's a Bear Advanced product, and then but the two bottles are both hose in. So you simply attach these to your hose and spray them. Again, pointed out earlier with your other fertilizers, you want to control where you're spraying it. Spray it where it's needed, not just randomly. Whoops. Well, we're going to have to wait a little while for soil temps to get back to 60. Oh, and we've missed the fall, but and it's important. It's not an overnight situation. This is going to hopefully kill out the fungus. As I mentioned, particularly with large patch or take all, if you need rapid image improvement, resodding is probably going to be the correct way to go at it. But you need to, particularly with take all, is apply these products to the soil when it, to the grass itself. If you wind up taking the grass out, treat the soil as well. Try to make sure that it has been destroyed, and be sure you make a note that you had this problem, because you're probably going to have it next year, and treat ahead of time. Take all, you're back to microbutanol. Same situation. I mean, it didn't change whether it was large patch or take all. It's not going to come back immediately, if at all. You can give it till the following year, but if it hadn't come back in the spring, it's not going to come back. Those are the funguses and treatments. Look around your yard. What's going on? The last item and what time of year it is, because some of what the pests we have are more calendar dependent. Chinch bugs and white grub are what people see the most of. White grubs, well, get ahead of myself. the June beetle, and let me go. We have a whole variety of what are considered June beetles and the worms that come out of them. You'll see this in your lawn by literally the leafing. The green vegetation has just fallen over. It's like it's not attached, and it's not. The roots have literally been eaten off your plants. With grubs, if you can dig down, clear off a little bit of the, ideally a square foot. If you got one grub in that square foot, you don't have a problem. Two, you might get by. Any more than that, you probably should go ahead and try to treat for grubs. If you're seeing damage, you know you have a problem. More of the life cycle, just what it's going to appear like. We're back to a lot of the same products in terms of what it's available to treat them. Let me move over. I normally don't really plug a product, and I'm not saying it's the best. I know this one has worked for me personally, and I've recommended it to other people, and they've been very successful in getting rid of grubs with the GrubX product. It used to be we'd say no St. Augustine, no chinch bug. Well, as zoysia has come in and we're seeing more of it, we've discovered that chinch bugs like it too. If you have Bermuda, you do not have chinch bugs, but St. Augustine or zoysia, you may. They're tiny little things. That's a dime. And what are there? 6 of them and a part in there. This is what the damage is going to look like. They're eating vegetation. They're not totally destroying the root, but and it's random. How to make sure it's chinch bugs? The best one I've had success with is the last one. If you have a coffee can or any kind of a something larger than a soup can, cut both ends out of it, and you can push that down in the ground, add some water, and give it a minute or two. And if you've got chinch bugs, they'll float up into the water. You could also rake some of the grass out, put it in a plastic bag, and they'll sit it in the sun and they'll show up. They're very, very hard to see when they're in the grass itself. Some things you might try. I've tried to put up one from every one of the major manufacturers. Everybody's got a chinch bug product. Chinch bug is fairly easy to control, just a nuisance. And again, if you have them this year, be on the lookout for them. There's no real preventative that you can use, but be aware that you had them, maybe you'll get them again. So you're looking a little bit more next year for them. Not seeing much in the way of army worms. Picture's not the greatest. It's kind of hard to see there, and I apologize. And it's going to eat off the top vegetation. And they're fairly ferocious if you get a large infestation. We've not had a large infestation of armyworms that I'm aware of here for several years. They seem to be cyclical, and I'm not sure what the current cycle is. Part of it has to do with how much there is available to eat. And as we get more and more houses going in and more lawns, hopefully they'll go to your neighbors and not yours. But again, it's one of these things, if you had them, you may get them again. At least be looking for them. Is it a grub? Is it a chinch bug? Is it an army worm? Before you start to treat, do whatever you can to determine and identify what is attacking my plant or my lawn. And again, a healthy lawn's your best defense. Sometimes it's really healthy and they're going to come get you because it is healthy and it's really tasty to them. But know your pest. All right. I know they said they would send you a list of all of the reference sites. If you're taking notes of any kind, write down this, or actually it's just Aggie Turf. Just Aggie Turf will bring this up. This is a hardbound, well, not hardbound, it's paperback. Don't buy it. I bought it. It's good. It was good the year I bought it, but it changes every year. All of the information there is available online. You've got specific information, weeds, insects, diseases. They'll have pictures. They've got products. So you'll see a lot of the same. Well, you'll see all of the same products I think I mentioned, but I find it to be invaluable in terms of identifying what the problem is and how to take care of it. One of the other things I talked about were calendars. Here's and this one is straight off of the Aggie site as well, a Bermuda grass. This one is what I call a pictorial. It's laid out in a one page. This time of year, okay, I'm in June. Here's where I am. This is what I should be doing or looking for. This one is another one also from AgriLife. It's more a narrative. If it depends on what I would call a visual versus a narrative person, which one's easier for you to use. But they come in different flavors. As long as you know what your grass is, get the calendar and it'll give you a ballpark of this is when you should start mowing. This is when you should be using a pre-emergent. This is when the post-emergents come into play, how much water, etc. It's just a really good tool, good reference. Get one of these and put it with your notebook on what's going on in your yard, and you'll be ahead. I don't want you to think in fact, I'm not an Aggie, but since I'm part of AgriLife, I guess I put them first. The second one down is the University of Arkansas, the University of Florida, and the last is Georgia. You could just put in turf.edu and that would get you all kinds of, but LSU's got some good stuff. Don't look at the North Carolina or the Penn State one. It's just not applicable. So think of where we are. If you would, use your phones, scan that. It's a quick response, we hope. And we'd really like to get your feedback. And leave that up for a little bit so you can, if you're like me, you got to turn it back on, get it out of airplane mode, shoot the picture. I know this will be included in what we're sending out as well as far as a follow-up.
So we have a few questions.
Okay, let me just,
Oh, sorry.
any questions?
Okay.
Couple of more things
Okay.
about master gardeners and references you might use. So let's talk about questions.
Okay, so someone was told that the snow would make our yards really green this summer because it has a lot of nitrogen. True or false?
It has no more nitrogen than the rain would have. The other thing to remember is, I think the number I saw was 4 inches of snow we got in Richmond. but two different estimates I've looked at. One was it takes 10 inches of snow to make 1 inch of rain, and the other one was 13 inches of snow to make 10 inches of rain. The one thing it does do positively is the snow melt is slow, and if you have it, particularly clay soil, it should have gotten better penetration because it's as slow a watering system as you can find. So that's the upside to it. As far as anything else, no.
Okay. Any tips on how to manage mowing your lawn when it is uneven? This person is facing scalping in his grass. So any tips about mowing, how to even it out?
Mow a different direction. Sometimes you get scalping because you've mowed it the same way all the time. And the other is, depending upon how large it is, adding either topsoil or sand to try to level it out, but don't try to take it all out at one time. You don't want to get a really thick layer, but you can, if you've got low spots and high spots, begin to level those out with sand's the easier one to use, and the grass comes up through it fairly quickly.
Along the lines of sod, someone is laying new sod in their yard and taking it down to the bare dirt. Anything
Yeah.
to be conscious of in doing that, and when should that be done?
Last October, this is a quick answer because you would have had several, but you don't want to do it during the summer for sure. If you can get on it right now, you're probably in pretty good shape. Make sure that what they're putting down is acceptable if they're in an HOA, that it is something that's approved by them, because you certainly don't want to go to the expense and labor and then have to do it again. Look at some of the new varieties. We have well, something called Tiff Tuff at our demonstration garden, or come out to our demonstration gardens and look at we have a zoysia, a Bermuda, a paspalum, and a St. Augustine. We've got those four, and they're not real pretty sometimes because we're really trialing them, letting them kind of go on their own. But the biggest thing, the biggest knock on St. Augustine was it required more water. The one that we have, the water requirements for it versus Bermuda are almost identical now. Some of the disease problems that we've seen in St. Augustine have been corrected in some of the new varieties. So at least look at newer varieties. Don't just go with an old one because you're familiar with it.
What
Next.
about, oh, sorry. What about chemical aeration that some lawn services push?
Well, I don't know of any chemical aeration that will truly do it. There are some products that are supposed to infiltrate, but I've not seen any recommendations on
Chemical.
the benefits of core aeration versus a chemical aeration. That one I'm just not as sure on.
And you did answer this already, but someone did ask about avoiding runoff when watering. After a
Yeah.
few minutes, it'll run to the curb, and
Yeah.
you suggested already the
There's a lot of the new controllers have something called soak and cycle.
token cycle.
If you have an older controller that doesn't do that, instead of running it, like I say, 10 minutes or 15 minutes, run it for 5, have it shut off, wait 10 minutes, or if your system will let you do multiple cycles, you're just doing the same zone multiple times, putting out the same amount of water, but spreading it out over a longer period of time so it can infiltrate into your soil.
At what interval would you strive to aerate St. Augustine grass? Every other year, annually?
your soil's going to have a big impact on that. If you're on clay, which most of us are, doing it every year is not going to hurt you, but I'm not sure it's going to achieve that much. The after work done after aeration, if you just aerate and you don't take the time and economic hit, I guess, to come back in with compost on top of it, because that's the best thing. You've got all these little holes punched in your yard, fill them with something good, and that's what the compost will do, and it'll help the rest of your lawn as well.
Okay, quick question. Do you know if you can measure your lot size on Google Earth?
Depends on how good a mathematician you are and what sort of resolution your computer's got. There are some programs that supposedly give you a pretty good estimate now.
Okay. Patricia asked what to do about a tiny spider type bug running within Bermuda grass. What are they and how to get rid of them? Is that a stunt mite?
It could be, but there are some small spider species that show up periodically. Most of what I talked about, well, all of what I talked about were fungicides.
Yes.
And you're looking at an insecticide at that point. It depends on how prevalent they are, how it's kind of a, is it worth treating? If it's an issue to them, it's worth treating. And an insecticide would be the better way to go. On the screen right now is the hotline or help desk that we also has an email address. If you can get a picture of the bug specifically and send it to them, they can help identify it, because whether it's an insect or a fungus or whatever, identifying what your problem is at least 50% of the battle. But,
okay, and last, oh, I'm sorry.
the hotline's gotten really good about working from pictures to be able to identify something and then come up with a solution.
And we have that, as Dan said, right there on the chat section. Last one, does anybody know of any affordable outlets for Bermuda grass seed? Does it come in seed?
It does. Let me first suggest they go to Aggie Turf. It's got all of the different varieties. It'll show you what's available as sod, what's available as seed, what's available as seed or sod. There's fewer and fewer grasses available as seed of a hybrid type. It depends on what they're wanting to do with the Bermuda grass. Is it just a lawn?
I'm not sure. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not sure about that.
But
Oh,
look
a
there.
large lawn, half acre. She just put Cindy,
Okay.
half an acre.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Check the Aggie site
Aggie.
and try to come up with a variety that looks like it might work for them, because it'll list all the different varieties that are available from seed.
Okay.
Common Bermuda, they can get at any of the feed stores, most of the box stores as well. Other than that, I mean, we're pretty close to Bowling. There's quite a few sod farms down that way. Some of them might have some suggestions also.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. Everybody is commenting on how fantastic it was.
Well, I
And
hope it didn't go too quick.
I thought it was perfect.
Okay.
It was really great. And we just want to remind everyone that this is the first of class in our landscape success for 2025, though I have 2024, sorry about that, on the screen. But please go to that, well, let me re-put the new one for 2025, but please go to the link and sign up for our other classes that we'll have once a month. And again, thank you so much for presenting today, and we hope everyone has a fantastic weekend.
Stay warm.
Stay warm. Bye, everyone.